Flight 2187 from Atlanta to San Francisco was about to become a battlefield at 30,000 feet altitude when Diane Winters, a privileged white woman, demanded that a black girl be removed from her seat. She had no idea what a hurricane she was about to unleash. Blatant racism was about to collide with ruthless justice, personified by an angry father with an FBI badge. Get ready for a whirlwind journey through the worst and best of human nature. Witness the electrifying moment when prejudice runs up against an insurmountable wall of federal authority. Feel the palpable tension as an FBI agent reveals her identity, freezing blood in the veins of an unmasked racist. This isn't just another story about discrimination. It's an impactful account of how hate can be defeated by the power of the law and the courage of a child. Embark on this explosive journey where every word spoken is a spark that threatens to set the cabin ablaze, and discover how a routine flight turned into a lesson in humanity that no one on board will ever forget. 1. The confrontation that rocked. Flight 2187, the weather at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta was as dense as the humidity hanging in the air. Passengers crowded the boarding gates, eager to escape the sweltering Georgia heat. Among them, Marcus Taylor and his daughter Zoe, a duo that stood out not only for their age difference, but for the aura of tranquility that enveloped them in the midst of the chaos of the terminal. Marcus, an FBI agent with 2 decades of experience, moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing threats in a matter of seconds. His eyes, always alert, scanned the crowd for any sign of danger, a professional habit that not even vacations could erase. Zoe, in turn, was the embodiment of youthful curiosity. At just 12 years old, she absorbed every detail of the airport as if it were the scene of one of her favorite novels. Her backpack, weighed down with books carefully chosen for the trip, beat rhythmically against her back as she struggled to keep up with her father's long strides. The contrast between father and daughter did not go unnoticed by the other passengers. Some cast curious looks, others smiles of approval, but it was Diane Winters who watched them with an interest bordering on hostility. Diane considered herself the epitome of Atlanta's high society. The widow of a real estate tycoon, she sailed the world with the expectation that every door would open at the sound of her name. The airport, in his view, was just another stage to exert his influence. When the shipment was announced, the tension in the air intensified. Marcus and Zoe stood in line, chatting excitedly about the plans for San Francisco. Diane, a few seats back, couldn't contain her irritation at the sight that a child would occupy a window seat, while she, a first-class passenger, was strapped to an aisle seat. The interior of the aircraft was a microcosm of society, with its invisible divisions and unspoken expectations. Marcus instinctively positioned himself between Zoe and the hallway, a human shield against the uncertainties of the world. Little did he know that the greatest threat would come not from a stranger, but from someone who considered himself above everyone else there. As the last passengers boarded, the atmosphere inside the plane changed. The buzz of conversations was interrupted by a shrill and authoritative voice. Diane Winters, in all her indignation, had decided that she would not accept her fate without a fight. "This is unacceptable," she proclaimed, her voice echoing through the booth. "I paid for a seat in first class, and I demand a window." Their gazes turned to her, some with sympathy, others with irritation. The cabin crew, trained to deal with all kinds of situations, tried to calm her down with promises to seek a solution. It was at that moment that Diane's eyes rested on Zoe, sitting quietly by the window, absorbed in her book. The expression on the woman's face transformed, a mixture of contempt and determination that made Marcus straighten up in his seat, all his federal agent instincts on high alert. What followed was a scene that would be etched in the memory of all present. Diane, driven by a sense of entitlement that surpassed any notion of decency, approached Zoe's seat. "You," she said, pointing an accusing finger at the girl, "don't need that seat. I have a medical condition that requires me to sit by the window." Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense, ready to protect his daughter. But before she could react, Zoe looked directly into Diane's eyes, her calm, steady voice surprising everyone. "I'm sorry for your condition, Mom," she said, "but I also need this seat. I get sick if I can't see the horizon during the flight." Zoe's mature and polite response only seemed to further inflame Diane's anger. His face turned red, and the words that came out of his mouth then shocked even the most callous passengers. "You people should be grateful to be here in the first place," she hissed, her prejudice wide open for all to see. "Maybe you'll feel more comfortable in the back of the plane." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stood up slowly, his presence suddenly filling the narrow hallway. Her normally warm eyes now shone with an intensity that made Diane instinctively recoil. "Madam," he said, his voice low but charged with authority, "I suggest you return to your seat immediately." It was at this pivotal moment that Flight 2187 transformed from a simple trip into a lesson in dignity, courage, and the consequences of blatant prejudice. 2. The revelation that silenced hatred, the air inside the plane's cabin seemed to have been sucked into the vacuum of space. The passengers, moments before occupied with their own concerns, were now completely absorbed in the drama that unfolded before them. Diane Winters, still standing in the narrow aisle, stared at Marcus Taylor with a mixture of outrage and defiance. "Who do you think you are to tell me what to do?" she spat, her voice trembling with anger. "You have no idea who I am or what I'm capable of." Marcus remained impassive, his posture erect and firm, as if facing a suspect at a crime scene. His years of training at the FBI prepared him for high-pressure situations, but he never imagined that he would have to use those skills to protect his own daughter from such a vile attack. "Actually, Ma'am," he replied, his voice calm but authoritative, "I have a very clear idea of who you are and what you are capable of. And that's why I'm going to give you one last chance to return to your seat before I'm forced to take more drastic measures." Diane's eyes narrowed, her arrogance momentarily replaced by confusion. She looked around, as if seeking support from the other passengers, but found only expressions of disapproval and discomfort. It was at that moment that Marcus made a move that would completely change the course of events. With deliberate calm, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a black leather wallet. With a fluid movement, he opened it, revealing a gleaming golden badge and official identification. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice now amplified by the authority the badge conferred. "I'm Special Agent in Charge Marcus Taylor of the FBI. What you have just done can be considered harassment and a violation of civil rights. I suggest once again that you return to your seat immediately." The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Diane Winters, who seconds earlier had radiated a confidence born of privilege and arrogance, now seemed to wither before everyone's eyes. His face, once red with anger, was now pale as a sheet. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The other passengers, who had hitherto watched the scene with a mixture of horror and fascination, now let out audible sighs of relief and in some cases even suppressed applause. The cabin crew, who had been on the verge of calling the captain to intervene, now watched with a mixture of gratitude and respect. Zoe, who throughout the confrontation had maintained a surprising calm for someone her age, looked at her father with a mixture of pride and admiration. She had always known that her father was a hero, but seeing him in action, defending her with such strength and dignity, was something she would never forget. Diane, still in shock, finally found her voice, but it was only a shadow of the arrogant. tone she had used moments before. I didn't know," she stammered, her once imposing posture now hunched over and defensive. Marcus, still holding onto his badge, responded in a voice that was both firm and compassionate. "Now you know, and I hope it serves as a reminder that our actions have consequences, and that respect and dignity are everyone's rights, regardless of skin color or social standing." Slowly, as if moved by invisible ropes, Diane began to retreat toward first class. His eyes, once full of disdain, now avoided eye contact with anyone. The silence that followed her was broken only by the sound of her high heels flapping in the aisle of the plane. When she finally disappeared from view, a collective sigh of relief ran through the cabin. Marcus put away his badge and turned to Zoe, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, his voice now soft and full of fatherly concern. Zoe nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I'm fine, Dad. You were amazing." Marcus smiled back, feeling a wave of pride and love for his brave daughter. "You were the amazing one, Zoe. The way you remained calm and dignified in the face of that situation. Your mother would be as proud of you as I am." As the tension in the cabin began to dissipate, the other passengers began to shift in their seats, some turning around to offer words of support and admiration to Marcus and Zoe. An elderly lady in the seat next to them leaned over and said with a warm smile, "You two just taught a lesson that we all needed to see. Thank you." The rest of the flight to San Francisco promised to be very different from what anyone could have imagined when they boarded. The incident had not only exposed the ugly face of prejudice, but also revealed the power of courage, dignity, and justice. And as the plane finally took off, leaving Atlanta behind, there was a palpable feeling among the passengers that they had all somehow been transformed by that experience. 3. Echoes of change in altitude. The roar of the plane's engines sounded like a distant whisper compared to the buzz of conversation that now filled the cockpit. The Diane Winters incident had broken down the invisible barriers that normally separate strangers on a flight. Passengers who had previously been engrossed in their own worlds now turned around in their seats, exchanging glances of complicity and words of admiration directed at Marcus and Zoe. Emily Chen, a pediatric heart surgeon sitting a few rows behind, watched the scene with a mixture of wonder and deep reflection. As an Asian American woman in a field dominated by white men, she knew well the bitter taste of discrimination. Seeing the situation handled with such firmness and dignity inspired her to act. Unbuckling her seatbelt, Emily stood up and walked determinedly toward Marcus and Zoe's row. Her white coat, which she hadn't had time to change before the flight, rippled slightly as she moved down the narrow aisle. "Excuse me," she said softly, reaching row 14. "I'm Dr. Emily Chen. I couldn't help but witness what happened, and I wanted to express my admiration for the way you both handled the situation." Marcus looked up, surprised by the unexpected approach, but quickly offered a warm smile. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. We appreciate your words." Zoe, always curious, her eyes shining with interest, asked, "Are you really a doctor?" "What kind of doctor?" Emily smiled, delighted with the girl's enthusiasm. "I am a pediatric cardiac surgeon. That means I operate on children's hearts." Zoe's eyes widened in admiration. "Wow, this must be amazing and scary at the same time." The conversation flowed naturally, with Emily sharing stories of her work and Zoe absorbing every word with evident fascination. Marcus watched the interaction, grateful for the positive distraction after the stress of the previous confrontation. Meanwhile, a few rows ahead, Richard Harrington, a retired federal judge, reflected on the incident he had just witnessed. With decades of experience in interpreting the law and judging human character, he recognized in Marcus's gesture not only the application of authority, but an act of social justice in its purest form. determined to add his voice to the backing chorus. Richard rose from his seat in first class and made his way toward the main cabin. As he passed Diane Winter's seat, he noticed that she was cowering. Arriving at Marcus's rank, Richard joined the small gathering that was forming. "Forgive me for intruding," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "But I felt I needed to express my admiration for what I saw today. I am Judge Richard Harrington, retired from the federal court." Marcus, recognizing the names of important cases he had studied during his FBI training, reached out in respectful greeting. "It is an honor, Your Honor. I appreciate your words." Richard smiled, his eyes moving between Marcus and Zoe. "What you two have demonstrated today goes beyond simple law enforcement. It was a living lesson in dignity and civil courage. In all my years at the bank, I have rarely seen such a powerful display of integrity." The conversation expanded, with Richard sharing insights from his years in the judiciary, Emily offering perspectives on health disparities related to prejudice, and Zoe contributing surprisingly mature observations for her age. What started as a small group soon attracted the attention of other passengers. James Wilson, an investigative journalist who was on his way to San Francisco to cover a story on housing inequality, watched the scene with growing interest. He recognized the potential for a powerful story, one that could illuminate the complexities of race relations and the power of individual acts of courage. Approaching the group, James introduced himself, explaining his interest in documenting the incident and its repercussions. "What happened here today," he said, "is a microcosm of larger issues facing our society. It would be a privilege to be able to tell this story, if you are willing." Marcus hesitated, his professional caution conflicting with his recognition of the importance of sharing experiences like this. It was Zoe who spoke first. "If telling our story can help other people, I think we should do it, Dad." Touched by his daughter's wisdom, Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe we can talk about it more after the flight, Mr. Wilson. It's a story that deserves to be told with care and context." As the conversation continued, a palpable sense of change permeated the cabin air. Passengers who would normally have spent flight hours isolated in their own worlds were now engaged in meaningful dialogues about race, justice, and the power of individual action. In the cockpit, Captain Sarah Rodriguez, who had been informed of the incident by the cabin crew, was reflecting on the impact that a single flight could have. With over 20 years of experience flying commercial aircraft, she had witnessed her share of onboard drama, but rarely something that brought passengers together in such a positive way. Deciding that the moment deserved to be recognized, Sarah grabbed the microphone from the aircraft's communication system. His voice, calm and professional, echoed through the booth. "Ladies and gentlemen, here is Captain Rodriguez. We were informed of the incident that occurred at the beginning of our flight, and I would like to express my admiration for the way it was resolved. This Flight 2187 is proving to be more than just a journey from Atlanta to San Francisco. It's a journey of mutual understanding and respect. Thank you for being part of this special moment." The captain's words were met with spontaneous applause from the passengers, solidifying the feeling of unity that had formed. As the plane continued its westward journey, cutting through cloud layers and time zones, something deeper was occurring within the metal fuselage. Barriers were being broken down, perspectives were being broadened, and seeds of change were being planted. Flight 2187 had become much more than just air travel. It has become a catalyst for difficult but necessary conversations, a reminder of the power of individual courage and a testament to the human capacity to grow and unite in the face of adversity. And as the sun began to set on the distant horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the passengers of Flight 2187 knew they were witnessing not only the end of a day, but the beginning of something new and promising. 4. Unexpected turbulence changes course. Flight 2187 had found its rhythm, the atmosphere in the cabin charged with a positive energy that no one could have predicted at the beginning of the journey. Conversations flowed freely among the passengers, social barriers dissolved by the unifying event they had all witnessed. However, the destination had other plans for this already extraordinary trip. The first indication that something was wrong came in the form of sudden turbulence. The passengers, absorbed in their discussions, barely noticed at first. But when the aircraft gave a second jolt, stronger than the first, everyone's attention was abruptly redirected. Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, her professional tone masking any concerns. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing an area of unexpected turmoil. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Marcus, his FBI agent instincts on high alert, exchanged a quick glance with Emily and Richard, who had remained close to his row. Without words, they understood the gravity of the situation. Zoe, feeling the sudden tension, grabbed her father's hand. "It's okay, honey," Marcus assured him, his calm voice contradicting the worry in his eyes. "It's just a little bit of turbulence." Minutes passed, each jolt of the aircraft adding to the passengers' anxiety. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the turmoil ceased. A collective sigh of relief permeated the cabin, but it was prematurely interrupted by Captain Rodriguez's voice again on the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a mechanical problem identified during the turbulence, we will be required to make an unscheduled landing in Denver for a safety inspection. I apologize for the inconvenience, but everyone's safety is our top priority." The news was greeted with a mixture of apprehension and frustration. Whispered conversations erupted throughout the cabin, with passengers speculating about the nature of the problem and the impact on their plans. It was in this moment of uncertainty that something remarkable began to happen. The bonds formed during the previous flight hours have proven to be stronger than the fear and anxiety that typically accompany such situations. Emily Chen, drawing on her expertise in calming patients before complex surgeries, began to converse softly with the passengers around her, offering words of comfort and medical explanations about how the body reacts to the stress of flying. Richard Harrington, for his part, used his imposing presence and calm voice to reassure those who expressed legal concerns about delays and compensation. His judicial experience has provided a unique perspective on passenger rights and the responsibilities of airlines. James Wilson, the journalist, found himself documenting not only the original story that had drawn him in, but also this unexpected new chapter. He watched in wonder as the makeshift community inside the plane came together in the face of adversity. Marcus, keeping Zoe close, used his observational skills to identify passengers who seemed particularly distressed. With a nod to Emily or Richard, he quietly coordinated efforts to offer support where it was needed most. Zoe, overcoming her own nervousness, began sharing stories from her favorite books with a frightened child sitting in the row behind her, demonstrating an empathy beyond her years. Even Diane Winters, still visibly shaken by the previous confrontation, seemed to find a purpose. Watching the situation develop, she hesitantly offered her state-of-the-art cell phone to an anxious passenger who urgently needed to contact a loved one. As the plane began its descent to Denver, a palpable sense of unity had settled among the passengers. What could have been a moment of panic and chaos turned into an impressive display of humanity and compassion. When the wheels finally touched the ground at Denver International Airport, spontaneous applause erupted from the cabin. It was not just a cheer of relief, but a celebration of the collective spirit they had cultivated. Captain Rodriguez, emerging from the cockpit to personally update passengers, was greeted with expressions of gratitude and respect. She explained that a detailed inspection would be necessary and that the delay could be significant. "We understand that this causes considerable inconvenience," she said, her voice carrying a mix of professionalism and genuine empathy. "But I want you to know that we are doing everything in our power to ensure that we can resume our journey as quickly and safely as possible." As passengers disembarked for the designated waiting area at the Denver airport, there was a distinct feeling that this group was no longer a collection of strangers united only by a common destiny. They had become a community forged by the fire of adversity and mutual understanding. In the airport lounge, Marcus watched as passengers naturally clustered together, offering support to each other, sharing snacks and stories. Emily organized a small relaxation group, guiding breathing techniques to help relieve anxiety. Richard has become a focal point for questions about passenger rights, offering clear and reassuring advice. Zoe, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and weariness, tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Dad," she said, her voice low but full of admiration, "I think we've made new friends today." Marcus smiled, hugging his daughter with one arm. "I think you're right, honey. And you know what? I think we all learned something important today." As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, casting a golden light through the terminal's large windows, passengers on Flight 2187 found themselves not bemoaning the unexpected delay, but valuing the extra time together. They had embarked as strangers in Atlanta, faced prejudice and fear together in the skies, and were now united in Denver, stronger and wiser by shared experience. Flight 2187 had become much more than just air travel. It has become a journey of self-discovery, compassion, and the realization of the power of unity in the face of adversity. And as they waited for the opportunity to complete their journey to San Francisco, each of the passengers knew that no matter the final destination, they had already arrived in a place of understanding and connection that few have the privilege of experiencing. 5. Transformations at 30,000 feet altitude. The terminal at Denver International Airport buzzed with unusual energy. The passengers of Flight 2187, now united by a shared experience that transcended the usual boundaries between strangers, had spread out into space, forming small conversation groups and mutual support. At the center of this improvised microcosm, Marcus Taylor watched the scene with a mixture of wonder and professional reflection. His years at the FBI had trained him to analyze human behavior, but what he saw before him defied any pattern he had ever encountered. Emily Chen, the pediatric heart surgeon, had turned a quiet corner of the terminal into a makeshift meditation room. About a dozen passengers sat in a circle, their eyes closed, breathing deeply under Emily's gentle guidance. The contrast between her white doctor's coat and the Zen posture she emanated created a powerful image of healing and compassion. Not far away, Richard Harrington, the retired judge, presided over a different group. With the upright posture and clear voice he had used for decades in court, he explained the rights of passengers and the obligations of airlines in situations of delay. His audience, an eclectic mix of executives, families, and solo travelers, absorbed every word with intense attention. Zoe, in turn, had become the center of a group of children. Sitting on the floor, her legs crossed, she read aloud from one of his books, her excited expression bringing the words on the page to life. Parents watched closely, gratitude evident on their faces for the welcome distraction for their anxious children. James Wilson, the journalist, moved between the groups, his notebook now almost full. He had come aboard in search of a story, but what he found exceeded any expectations. His eyes sparkled with the emotion of a writer who knows he is witnessing something truly extraordinary. And then there was Diane Winters. The transformation into his demeanor was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The woman who hours earlier had exuded arrogance and prejudice was now sitting silently on a bench, watching the scene around her with an expression that oscillated between shame and fascination. Marcus, noticing Diane's isolation, made a decision. With deliberate steps, he approached and sat down next to her. "Mrs. Winters," he began, his voice calm and devoid of judgment. "How are you feeling?" Diane cringed slightly, clearly uncomfortable. I don't know," she admitted after a moment of hesitation. "I've never felt so exposed." Marcus nodded understandingly. "Exposure can be uncomfortable, but it can also be an opportunity for growth." Diane looked at him, surprised by the lack of hostility. "Why are you talking to me after what I did?" "Because I believe that all people have the ability to change," Marcus replied simply. "And because forgiveness and understanding are the most powerful tools we have to fight prejudice." Tears began to form in Diane's eyes. "I was horrible," she whispered. "Not just today, but for a long time." Marcus remained silent, offering space for Diane to process her emotions. "You know," she continued after a moment, "I grew up in a world where I was taught that my worth was tied to my status, to how exclusive my social circle was. I never questioned that until today." As Diane spoke, Marcus noticed Emily approaching. The doctor had completed her meditation session and, noticing the delicate conversation, decided to offer support. "Forgive me for interrupting," Emily said softly, "but I couldn't help listening. Mrs. Winters, as a physician, I can tell you that acknowledging our own prejudices is the first step to healing." Diane looked at Emily, then back to Marcus. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not about deserving it," Marcus replied. "It's about creating a better world, one moment at a time." At this moment, Zoe approached the group, her eyes shining with the energy of a well-told story. She paused, watching the scene before her with a wisdom beyond her years. "Dad," she said, addressing Marcus but looking at Diane, "remember what you always tell me? That people can learn and grow at any age?" Marcus smiled, pride evident on his face. "Exactly, honey." Diane looked at Zoe, tears now running freely down her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "for what I said, for what I did. You're an amazing young woman, and I've been so blind." Zoe, in a gesture of compassion that left the adults in awe, reached out and gently touched Diane's arm. "It's okay," she said. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is to learn from them." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the airport's loudspeaker system. "Attention passengers of Flight 2187 to San Francisco. Maintenance has been completed and we are ready to restart boarding. Please proceed to Gate A42. A murmur of excitement ran through the group as passengers began to move around, collecting their luggage and preparing to resume their journey. There was a palpable feeling that something fundamental had changed. Richard Harrington, joining the group, remarked, "It seems that our unexpected delay was actually a gift in disguise." James Wilson, his notebook now full of notes, agreed. "This is not just a story about a halted flight," he said, his eyes shining with inspiration. "It's a story about how the unexpected can bring us together, transform us." As they walked together toward the gate, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey they had experienced, not just the physical distance they had traveled, but the emotional and spiritual distance they had traversed as a group. Flight 2187 had become much more than a simple trip from Atlanta to San Francisco. It has become a catalyst for change, a microcosm of possibilities of what society could be like when people open themselves up to mutual understanding and compassion. And as they reboarded, ready to complete their journey, each passenger carried with them not only their physical luggage, but also the light and powerful weight of a new perspective, unexpected connections, and the promise of a more understanding and united future. 6. Landing at a new dawn. Flight 2187 cut through the night sky, its metal fuselage gleaming in the moonlight as it approached the California coast. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was remarkably different from the tension and conflict that had marked the beginning of the journey. A sense of camaraderie and mutual understanding permeated the air, as tangible as the soft hum of engines. Marcus Taylor, sitting in his familiar seat at the side of the aisle, watched the passengers around him with a contemplative gaze. Zoe, exhausted but content, had finally fallen asleep, her head resting gently on her father's shoulder. Across the hall, Emily Chen was talking quietly to Richard Harrington, her words occasionally punctuated by thoughtful nods. A few rows ahead, Diane Winters sat upright in her seat, her eyes fixed on the window, though the darkness outside offered little to see. The transformation in his posture and behavior was remarkable. The arrogance that once defined her had given way to a reflective stillness. James Wilson, the journalist, moved silently down the hall, picking up the last details for his story. His notebook was filled with observations, quotes, and reflections on the extraordinary events that had unfolded in the last few hours. As the plane began its final descent to San Francisco International Airport, Captain Rodriguez's voice echoed through the loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach to San Francisco. The weather is clear, with a current temperature of 15 degrees Celsius. Before we land, I would like to express my personal gratitude to all of you. In my 20 years flying, I have never witnessed a group of passengers demonstrate such a level of compassion, understanding, and unity in the face of adversity. You have transformed what could have been a negative experience into something truly inspiring. Thank you for being part of this extraordinary journey." The captain's words were met with spontaneous and warm applause. Passengers exchanged smiles and nods of recognition, the connection between them now undeniable. As the lights of San Francisco became visible through the windows, Marcus gently woke Zoe up. "We're coming, honey," he said softly. Zoe blinked sleepily, a smile spreading across her face as she recalled the day's events. "Dad," she said, her voice still hoarse with sleep, "do you think things will be different now?" Marcus considered his daughter's question, aware that it referred to something much bigger than just the end of her trip. "I think so, Zoe," he finally replied. "Maybe not all at once, but small changes can lead to big transformations." When the plane's wheels finally touched down on San Francisco, there was no applause. Instead, a respectful silence fell over the cabin, as if all the passengers were absorbing the meaning of the moment. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers began to prepare to disembark. But there was a palpable hesitation, a reluctance to break the bubble of understanding and connection they had created. Emily Chen was the first to stand up, addressing Marcus and Zoe. "I can't let you leave without us exchanging contacts," she said, a warm smile lighting up her face. "What we experienced here, well, I think we all feel like it's something we shouldn't leave behind on the plane." Richard Harrington agreed, joining the conversation. "I completely agree. Perhaps we can organize a meeting in a few months to see how this experience has affected us in the long run." James Wilson, hearing the suggestion, enthusiastically added, "That would be amazing for the follow-up to my story, if everyone agrees, of course." One by one, other passengers joined the conversation, exchanging phone numbers, email addresses, and even social media profiles. What had started as a group of strangers forced into uneasy closeness now resembled more of a reunion of old friends, reluctant to separate. Diane Winters, who had remained quiet, finally approached the group. His face was marked by dry tears, but his eyes shone with a new clarity. I'd like to be a part of that too," she said hesitantly. "If they accept me." There was a moment of silence, and then Zoe, with the innocence and wisdom that only a child can possess, reached out to Diane. "Of course we do," she said simply. Zoe's gesture seemed to break any remaining tension. Smiles were exchanged, hugs shared, and promises made to keep in touch. When they finally disembarked, entering San Francisco's illuminated terminal, there was a shared feeling that they were stepping not only into a new state, but into a new chapter of their lives. Marcus, with Zoe by his side, paused for a moment to watch the group disperse, each passenger going their own way, but all irrevocably changed by the shared experience. "You know, Zoe," he said, a thoughtful smile on his face, "when we boarded this flight in Atlanta, I thought we were just going to visit your grandmother. But I think we ended up taking a much bigger trip." Zoe nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "We took a trip to a better place, didn't we, Dad? Not a place on the map, but a place within us." Marcus hugged his daughter, feeling a wave of pride and hope. "Exactly, dear. And now, our task is to take what we learn here to the outside world." As father and daughter walked out of the airport into the San Francisco night, the sky was beginning to clear in the east. A new day was dawning, not just for the passengers of Flight 2187, but perhaps in some small but significant way for all those whose lives they would touch from then on. Flight 2187 was over, but the real journey, one of understanding, compassion, and change, was just beginning.